I call myself a lapsed lawyer who left a large firm 30 odd years ago. I discovered computers, and the big news was that they weren't just for the accountant or the word processing operator, but for lawyers. And it was at a good time because that toy came out called the Macintosh, and it had a graphical interface that allowed people to, in a very tactile fashion, interact with the computer rather than sort of the C prompt, etc. And I was not alone because around that time there was a little community of Mac lawyers, and the Jim Fitzsimons, the Graham Greenleafs, and we all sort of saw the potential. And it was nurtured by the Society for Computers and the Law and other communities. I myself put about 2,000 lawyers through a day-long course on how they, as lawyers, could be empowered by technology. That was over the next decade, from the mid-80s to the early 90s. And it resulted in Sydney, a real hotbed of innovation and development. Similarly to Sydney, there was Toronto, and that's been mentioned already as a current hotbed, and it was at the same time. It was Sydney and Toronto were very strong on the message of computers were for lawyers, and there were some interesting things coming out. And it was a different way of working in very much a hands-on sense, and it was possibly highlighted by my mentor from Toronto, Canada, a pioneer of legal technology, Peter Hart. His brother negotiated the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement, and he did this on a keyboard, 2 fingers at a time, hunt and peck, and it was decided it was much more effective than the, shall we say, the traditional way of, at the end of the day, going off and typing it up and then spending the first hour or so arguing about what really should have been in there. It sort of highlighted the benefits of lawyers interacting directly with technology, and as part of my courses, and one of my secrets was there was special tools such as outliners which actually help you think and plan and organise, and you end up writing way above yourself. And I hear of lawyers who don't recognise the work they've done when they've used tools that have been optimised for authors to draft and plan and think. And then if you add to that, one of my favourite tools is a database, because after all, lawyers are information managers. Journalists, accountants, librarians were regarded around that time as those who would benefit most from technology. Their raw materials were tech and their output was tech. And so I'm a big fan of databases. To be productive, you really need something like at least 2 monitors so you can see what's happening and not be distracted by having to unstack whatever you're working on. You can glance from your work to your research to this to that, and really gain some momentum, and the mind's not distracted by the slowness of it all. So you become much more effective, and you can actually become smarter if you're then relieved with a practice management system via all the tasks you've got to do, instead of juggling and saying, oh, I've got to do this and got to do that. Everyone should have a practice management system that actually helps you do the things you have to do and unburden you of that weight of remembering all that. You can get on and focus focus on the job. And so I talk about smarter lawyers as being part of a lawyer's workstation that's been optimised for each individual law. And so there are lawyers who have been operating and empowered over the last 30 odd years at a completely different level, and they're as though they're in a different world. But we're really just at the dawn of a new age, and it'll open up technology to more lawyers, and that will not only benefit lawyers but the whole of humanity. That's artificial intelligence. and other decision support tools. We'll see the industrialisation of law, and we've already heard about unbundling, etc. And we'll also see the demise of the artisan lawyer who does things one at a time. It just, in the same way you wouldn't make a motor car in your backyard, you'll see a complete change in the way lawyers operate. And we've heard about this morning about unbundling, etc., productisation. I've gone one step further and I talk about componentisation, and that is not only unbundling but taking the pieces that the client needs and putting them together. A little like, and I've got big on cars lately, particularly with the idea of the driverless car and artificial intelligence associated with that. But it's similar to car manufacturers. Toyota, they source hubcaps, etc. And you might think this is a bit radical. Well, we're already doing that, say, in conveyancing. You get outsource, there's the term, outsource. You get searches done. You might have a settlement, outsource settlement. More recent thing is the outsourcing of identification. Over the last decade or so, we've put on we have a conference every year where the legal tech visionaries gather here in Sydney and swap notes. In the past, it's been consoling each other as to why we were the only ones who got it and no one else did, but it's become a bit more fashionable. And a couple of products of that has been a fellow called Sean Simmons, who used to be work with Amazon, a lawyer who worked with Amazon and What If. He's developed an app called Zip ID, and for $40 or something like that, you can send a courier to the door of your client, the lawyer in a virtual office who is a long way away from your client, and the courier will ID that client for you. Similarly, another member of our group, InfoTrack, they provide a similar service. And so we're seeing all these interesting components. So it's all, and the empowerment of lawyers. And it's all very well having empowered lawyers and empowered capabilities, but if the system is broken, then you've got other challenges. And that was brought to my attention in the mid-90s when we supplied a court display system for the Singapore judiciary, because what we found when installing this court display system was that Singapore had a plan, and that plan included removing the legal system as a barrier to doing business in Singapore. And that involved reducing the delay in, say, the higher courts from 18 months or 2 years down to 3 weeks. You filed your commencing documents and you were on in 3 weeks. They had a similar plan for at the consumer level, where they wanted tourists to come out to Singapore and spend money and without being concerned. They said if there was any problems, we would resolve it within 24 hours, and if we didn't, we'd fly you back. So that's a fairly significant message. But it's all very well, changing things, etc. But if the drivers of the legal system aren't up to using the technology, then we do have some problems. And I saw that highlighted when I was showing an example of our system in the mid-90s, where we had transcript rolling across the screen, and in real-time transcript we're in an office, and it was the hearing was going on across town somewhere, and I said, this software is marvellous how you can just highlight a bit of text, and as soon as you take your finger off it, it goes into a database. And this person said, what's the database? Which not quite as bad as another one I had, which is, how did I get that thing to move across the screen, which was referring to a mouse. The cursor, yes. So, I said it, magic, So what we have is a situation where I'm concerned that not enough lawyers realise that they're in the information management game. There's all this fashionable talk now about big data, and it's let's throw serious technology, artificial intelligence at solving problems. Well, it's been pointed out that, well, these problems are possibly there because a small problem was ignored. So there's a current trend. There's definitely a trend in the US that's been around for a decade, which is to throw fascinating technology at discovery. And there you're dealing with millions of documents, and some extraordinary tools have been developed. But the question is, why should you have 1 million documents in the first place? Similarly, they're now doing, there's a lot of work going into contracts. And for example, just yesterday someone released something in the UK about a tool that enabled you to find in all your documents Brexit relevant clauses, because all of a sudden they're becoming important. But the CEO of Axiom, who George mentioned early on, he wrote an article recently saying, well, what's all the fuss about? If you did it properly in the first place, you wouldn't have this big data problem, which was to put the contracts into a contract database. That's not a DMS, but a system for clients to manage their documents. So at any instance, they can tell what's happening with their documents, rather than come along after the event and have a big data problem. So the legal profession does have a lot of challenges, but the big one I said is the value gap, and that's where you have the perception of clients is they think the value is this, but the lawyers think they're providing this value, and the challenge is to reduce that gap. The good news amongst all this is that, unlike, and I understand last night that, a couple of days ago, that Four Corners had a show on robots and the jobs that will be lost, there's a ton of information on where we're headed. But the legal profession is lucky because it's got a backup pool of work that's been neglected. I call it the latent legal market, as Richard Granite raised that a number of years ago, but it was pointed out earlier on that 15%, say 20% of the legal needs out there are met by lawyers. So that means that, shall we say, 80% of society's legal needs are not met by lawyers. Artificial intelligence and the related tools are going to help us lower that gap and turn previously unprofitable work into profitable work, particularly if you unbundle it and you say, all right, client, you do this work which it's best if I don't do it because I've got to charge a ridiculous sum. So if you do that, or we take our components, put them together, and what it does is leave the lawyer doing the high-paying work at a high rate, fill their day up with all this 80% work that in the past has been neglected. So just to finish up, I just wanted to talk about, we had George talking about his Next Law, and you've all heard of Old Law, and there's a fellow in the US called Jeff Carr, and he talks about Next Law, and it's where we should be headed, as in things are moving so quickly that even new law is becoming old law, and that's to do with prevention, and it brings in Richard Susskind's concept of the ambulance at the bottom of the hill. We've got a bit of a, legal profession's got a bit of a problem with ambulances. I've recognised that there might actually be fewer ambulances to chase thanks to driverless cars because there'll be fewer accidents. But we've got this perception, the legal profession has this perception challenge of being associated with the big band-aid, the ambulance, etc., the fixing the problem, when where we should be is looking at prevention. And artificial intelligence and other tools have a great role to play there in terms of reducing the real flow of legal problems. So it's all very well fixing the problems with the courts, and yes, there are ways to do that, but we'll see in the future a dramatic slowing of the amount of work coming through thanks to technology. So I just thought I'd mention those points, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you. Not in any particular order, but you mentioned something, and I didn't quite follow. You said a courier will ID the client for you. Now, in what context?
So one of these
I assume that's like a filling a gap, an Uber type service, is it?
Yeah, so a well-known courier company, whose name escapes me, knocks on the door and said, "Are you William Smith?" And whatever the process that a law firm would do to go through to ID a client in the office is done. I think the couriers are all certified, and for a fixed fee, and that's the big thing. All this is fixed fee. What we need is certainty in terms of fees. It'll cost that a certain amount. So the courier knocks on the door and checks their driver's license and this and that, and away you go.
Okay. You talked about artificial intelligence will benefit lawyers. Could you just elaborate on that, how you see AI benefiting lawyers in the future?
So artificial intelligence has become very fashionable. It's also become very broad. At the moment, there's a number of tools out there in the area of, for example, where it's really going to help lawyers, it's going to be the next interface. So we've had the tactile interface of the GUI, the smartphone where you swipe. It's very tactile. The next generation is speaking to the computer, and it'll help you do things. It'll help you with research. There's a system from Toronto, Canada, called ROS, based on IBM's Watson, and essentially it is like a librarian or a research lawyer or whatever. It helps you, and if it's to be used at its best, it presents information to you, and you decide as a trained professional whether that's useful or not. So in research, in litigation already, review of documents has been found to be superior if done by computers than people, because people get tired, people get distracted, bored, etc., poorly trained. So there's a number of areas it can be used, and it's actually going to creep into our lives slowly, rather than say, "Hi, I'm Hal, your new lawyer." And if we use it as almost like a second opinion or a research assistant, we'll do much better than getting into arguments about whether it's Hal QC or or whatever.
Let me ask you about graduates coming out of university. I don't know whether you've had any experience in dealing with graduates coming out of law school. Are you seeing them being better able to deal with technology? And is that because of the fact that they've probably, since they were babies, started using a smartphone or their parents' smartphone and worked up from there? Or are the universities supporting them in being able to hit the ground running when it comes to using technologies within a legal practice?
So the big thing about the younger lawyers these days is they're not intimidated by technology. Remember the days where you weren't allowed to go into the computer room in case you sneezed? And,
I remember the days I wasn't allowed to use a fax machine.
So, but I'm not convinced that they have a superficial knowledge. At least they're keen, they have a superficial knowledge. They're not interested in boring things like databases, outliners, so formatting of documents or that sort of thing. So they're very good with the phone and very good in this collaborative world, but there are areas that do need to be addressed. And I'm not convinced that the universities are equipped to do that, because they're actually not necessarily providing the depth of the legal IT that would be useful. So We're seeing an improvement. We're seeing a new. We need to see a new sort of lawyer. I mentioned about the conference I put on every year. What I find as a common trend is those lawyers who are doing innovative things had something outside of law. I mean, an extreme is Phil Argy, for example, who was an engineer. They had a sort of another life. And so people talk in the future of the T-shaped lawyer. Yes, we need the technical lawyer, but to have other skills would be an asset, particularly as we're going to see a divergence in the legal profession in the sense that, and it's typified by Legal Vision, a firm. It's got something like 20 lawyers who just do legal work. It's got 20 lawyers, another 20 lawyers who are not practicing. They do the marketing, the writing, they're the knowledge engineers, etc. So you're going to see law, diverge in that sense. And maybe it's something the Law Society needs to accommodate and encourage. Otherwise, you'll find that people will go outside the law. They will become outlaws or outsiders, particularly when I've heard young lawyers say, why would I go the traditional path, stay within the profession, when the risk, and this was actually in the US, so to be fair, our association will then tie my hands behind my back in terms of competing with those who are out there on the fringes. So,
well, thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Simon. When you talk about artificial intelligence and also the use of significant amounts of data, do you think, lawyers will need to understand actually what they're looking at, won't they? And therefore how this artificial intelligence has gone about surfacing what it surfaces.
Exactly. Unless you understand the process, it can be a bit dangerous, and you also need to know when to use a computer and when not to. And I still know how to use one of these, and and so you do see these people who blindly use technology all the time. Well, there's a place for it, and there's a place not to use it. There's a place for just the smartphone, which is a computer, and there's a place for big monitors because you need to see things, make decisions, find links, and this is where the visual world is headed. But yes, it is important that you understand what's going on, particularly if a pilot of a plane. When things break, you need to take over.